From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon. I have the privilege of introducing our very special and very talented interviewer for this program. He's one of the nation's leading philanthropists, a tireless advocate of reading and literacy, a great friend of the Library of Congress, and the individual most responsible for ensuring that there is a National Book Festival year after year, David Rubenstein.
Thank you. I know I couldn't do that. So we're very privileged today to have Diane Rehm as our special guest. And
Thank you. Thank you.
So it sounds like everybody knows who she is. I'll give a very brief introduction, and then we'll cover a lot of her life in the discussion. But she's a native of the Washington area, actually graduated from Roosevelt High School. She, the Roosevelt? And then she decided to volunteer for a radio talk show on WAMU, and ultimately she became the host of that show in 1979, and subsequently that show, which was called The Kaleidoscope at the time, was renamed the Diane Rehm Show in 1984, I think it is.
Right.
And subsequently it was made an NPR broadcasted, not just a Washington broadcast, but nationwide. Diane, in addition to hosting that show every weekday for now 37 years, and she will retire from that show at the end of this year. She is, in addition to that, she's an author. She's written several books about her life, and the most recent one, which we're going to talk about, is right here, which I will show on my own. I have read it, and it's thoroughly enjoyable. I highly recommend it because it's a very personal story about being alone after her husband passed away and their relationship, and we'll get into that in a moment. So why don't we start by saying, did you ever think that you would be a nationwide radio host and have a show for 37 years when you started volunteering in 1973?
Never in a million years.
And the reason you didn't think so is because you weren't trained as a broadcast person. You in fact, as you mentioned in your book, you graduated from high school and your parents did not really expect you couldn't afford to go to college. So you went right into work, is that right?
As a secretary.
Okay. And your parents thought that was an appropriate kind of thing for somebody in that situation at the time?
Absolutely, and thought I would marry, have children, and follow a prescriptive Arab life.
Right.
My father came here from Beirut, Lebanon. My mother came here from Alexandria, Egypt. I'm first generation, full-blooded Arab, and they really expected me to follow in that pattern.
Now, your parents, your father came from Beirut, your mother came from Egypt, but she was from Beirut or Lebanon initially.
They were both born in Mersin, which was in Turkey. There was no Syria at the time. My father's family then went to Lebanon. My mother's family went to Alexandria, Egypt.
And people may not realize it, but there's obviously a Christian population in those countries, and was. And so you're actually, you were raised in a Greek Orthodox?
Syrian
Orthodox Church.
Right.
Okay. So you went to work at the State Department eventually, and you had a job as a secretary typist.
Quite right.
And so your goal was to get married and please your parents?
Absolutely. My mother, in fact, was dying at the time, and she wanted me to marry an Arab. And she was lying on the couch in our living room when I was married. She died 2 months later, and my father died 10 months after that of a broken heart. I was 19.
Your mother was 40 years old when she died?
49.
49, and she died of cirrhosis.
She did.
But she wasn't a drinker, so how did that cirrhosis come about?
We have no idea.
And
Absolutely no idea. She and my father used to have a single shot of whiskey on Christmas and New Year's, and that was it.
so in a previous book you wrote, your first book, you wrote about the very complicated relationship you had with your mother. And it was the subject of much of the book in terms of trying to free yourself from some of the memories. And are you able to talk about how that was so complicated and why it kind of propelled you forward to a career later on?
You know, in an Arab household, one never asked questions. As a child, one took what one's parents said, and that was it. There were no questions asked. There was no, why do I have to do this, or why can't I do this? And the irony, David, is that here I am, all these years later, asking all the questions I want to ask.
So you pleased your parents, I guess, to some extent. You did get married relatively young, and that marriage lasted for a few years?
2 years.
2 years. And then you decided to later get married to John Rehm.
Exactly.
And he was a well-educated lawyer from Harvard, Columbia Law School. So did you feel at the time, you know, he was well-educated, you had only gone to high school graduation, was that a problem, or you didn't think it would be a challenge, or?
He became my teacher, and that was the relationship, and he loved it, and so did I. I could ask him any question about politics, about history, about music, about art, about literature, and he could help me learn, and that's what he did.
Okay. So you had a fairly traditional marriage early on. You had 2 children.
Right.
And you have 2 children, and they're now grown and living elsewhere.
Right.
And you have grandchildren.
Yes.
And so when your children were growing up, you decided to maybe try to do something else other than raise your children. What propelled you to try to do something else at the time?
I think it was in the midst of the feminine revolution when all of us of my era began asking ourselves, is there something else? My children were at the time 14 and 11, and I thought, what's going to happen to me after they're gone? They have been my life for 14 years. What's next? Betty Friedan's book came out, and I thought, well, maybe there is something. And when the opportunity to volunteer at this tiny little station, this is 1973, tiny little station, not even yet a member of NPR, because you had to have 5 full-time employees to become a member of NPR, and we only had 2.
So you volunteered there, and what did you do as a volunteer? What was your job?
The first day I got there as a volunteer, I was met at the door not by the host, but by the manager, who said, I'm so sorry to tell you, but the host is out sick. And so she said to me, so I, the manager, am going to have to do the program, and I'd like you, Diane Rehm, to come into the studio and help me do the program. So the very first day as a volunteer, I was on the air in front of a microphone for 90 minutes with a representative of the Dairy Council. 90 minutes, David.
Wow.
Cream, milk, butter, meat, and I knew from my role as a mother that the Department of Agriculture had that food pyramid all wrong.
Okay. So, did you drink any milk in that interview or no? You
No, I drank no
No
milk
milk.
in that interview.
So, eventually, you decided that there was an opening for a full-time position.
Indeed, the young woman who had been the assistant producer left to have a baby, and I was in the right place at the right time.
So you got that job, and then the person who was the host of Kaleidoscope, as it was then called, said she was leaving the job, and you decided you would apply, or were you sure you were going to apply for her job?
I was not sure I was going to apply because at the time I was doing 2 part-time jobs, the Associated Press radio network. I was doing small pieces on medical issues for them and employed part-time by Physicians Radio Network, and getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to put a microphone in front of Joe Califano, who was at the time head of HEW, all medical stuff, the head of the FDA, the head of whoever was doing something on medicine. So 2 part-time jobs were going to pay me as much as a full-time, 5-day week, 2-hour on-the-day program. And so I did a plus and a minus list.
Right.
A good and a bad. And finally, with my husband, we decided I'd go for the WAMU job. 100 other people across the country applied for it, and I got the job.
Got it. And at the time it was called Kaleidoscope. You didn't say, let's change the name to...
No, not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. Not yet.
So to prepare for those shows, you have to do the research. So do you have people that help you, or did you, in the early days, people that do the research, book the guests? How did you do all that? You did all yourself?
David, in those early days, WAMU had no money, no resources, except to pay for a few people, the on-air hosts. I got to the office at 7:30 in the morning, and I was there until 8:30 at night, doing the booking, doing the researching, doing the preparation, doing everything. And at the start, it was 3 hours a day.
So
Until November of that year when Morning Edition came on. And then, thank God, it was 2 hours a day. Finally, my husband said, you can't do this anymore. You're going to drop dead. So I finally prevailed upon my then manager for a part-time assistant. And eventually, it has reached that point where we have 5 full-time employees and 3 part-time. And I have to tell you, they're all women.
So
Thank you. Thank you.
have you ever considered an affirmative action program for your hiring?
You know, we've had men as part of the staff. They've gone on to do bigger and better things. I've had people come and go, but one of my producers has been with me for 22 years. Another has been with me for 10. You know, it's wonderful.
So today, you've now been doing this for 37 years.
36.
So of all the people you've interviewed,
Oh, Dave.
I mean, there must be somebody what was the most embarrassing thing that ever happened?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask. All right. Tom Clancy. And before I even tell you the Tom Clancy story, at one point today, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, with his wife, came over and said to me, "I want to apologize to you." I knew exactly why he was apologizing. He had promised to be on my program for a full hour. And at 20 before the hour, he hung up. Not because we were having any disagreement. He said to me, "I want to apologize to you. I left you hanging, and you had to open the phones, and all these years I felt terrible about it, and I want to apologize." I must be the only person in the world to whom Newt Gingrich has ever apologized. Really? So Tom Clancy.
Tom Clancy.
All right. Tom Clancy walks in. He's got dark glasses on. I think he's going to take them off when he comes in the studio. Instead, he puts his elbow on the table, puts his hand up like that, covering his eyes. He doesn't even look at me. I ask him a really good question. He says, "Yep." I ask him another really good question, and he says, "Nope." And I'm looking at the clock. And I'm thinking, I've got two choices. I can either say to him, "Mr. Clancy, it's clear you'd rather not be here, so you can just leave and I'll talk to the audience." Or maybe he's got some problem with me. Maybe he doesn't like me as the interviewer. So instead, I'll just open the phones and let people call in and talk to him. First caller. "Mr. Clancy, we love your books." And Clancy is smiling. And then the caller goes on to say, "But you sure are being arrogant with our Diane." At which point, Tom Clancy takes his glasses off, throws them on the table, and says, "Oh no, we're having a wonderful time, aren't we, Diane?" And the guy on the phone says, "It sure doesn't sound that way to us, Mr. Clancy." And from then on, he's a pussycat, and we have a great interview.
Is it hard to get people, presidents of the United States, to come on? Or you've interviewed a number of presidents, and how do you get them, or how hard is it to book somebody like that, or Secretary of State, or somebody like that?
Well, I'll tell you, when I was honored 2 years ago by receiving the Humanities Presidential Medal, I went to the White House, as many people did this week, including NPR's own Terry Gross, who won it this year. Right. Absolutely. So I went up to the stage to shake hands with the president, and the first thing he does is to whisper into my ear, "You know, Diane, I was on your program before I became president." And I whispered back into his ear, "Yes, Mr. President, and it's time for you to come back on again." And so we are currently in negotiation with the White House for me to go into the Oval Office to do my last program on the air with the program.
Well,
and we hope that that happens.
now, since you've just announced that, it'll be difficult.
Now, we hope it happens.
So when you are an interviewer, one of the most important things is your voice.
Yes.
So when did you realize that your voice wasn't working as well as you had wanted it to work? How many years ago was that?
It was 1992 when the problem began. And it began because, and I can verify this through Senator Barbara Mikulski, I started coughing, tiny little cough, and the cough became more frequent. And it reached a point where Barbara Mikulski was coming on to the program, and she was standing there, and I said, Senator, forgive me, I was in tears. I said, I can't do the interview. I can't talk. And she said, if you need me, I can help get you into NIH. She said, what do you think the problem is? And I said, well, I've been taking a lot of Advil. And she said to me, and you can check on this, she said to me, you know, that is one of the reasons we almost did not approve Advil for over-the-counter sales. But we decided to go forward with it. In any case, in order to get a diagnosis, they kept putting tube after tube after tube down my throat. They kept saying to me, it's all in your head. There's nothing wrong with your throat or your vocal cords. Finally, and I'm going to tell you how I sounded the day I got off the air. That's how I sounded.
So you went off the air, and then you began a search for doctors who could actually diagnose it.
Nope, I had already had that search from 1992 to 1998, when I finally went off the air for 4 months.
4 months.
And my doctor finally called and said, we're sending her to Johns Hopkins. We've got to find out if there's cancer somewhere, or ALS, or Parkinson's. And I got to Johns Hopkins, was examined by a neurologist and an otolaryngologist, and within 1 hour, they said, you have spasmodic dysphonia, which is a problem whose origins they have no clue on. Begins in the basal ganglia of the brain. The basal ganglia informs the vocal cords to clamp down inappropriately. There is no known cause, there is no known cure, but there is a treatment, and I received an injection of Botox that very day.
So Botox, which is, you know, poison. They gave you a little bit of it, and they told you it would probably take away your voice for a while. And did it do that?
It did indeed, and for 1 week, I had absolutely no voice. I could only whisper. And my husband had to put his ear to my mouth to hear me, and he said it was the most intimate time of our marriage.
So ultimately, the Botox worked.
Worked.
But you still need to get Botox repeatedly or not?
Every 4 months, I fly out to Portland, Oregon, where my doctor from Johns Hopkins now is, and I get that injection, which I just had 2.5 weeks ago, and then went to Dallas, fell on the plane, broke my foot, and have been at home. I go back on the air finally on Monday.
Okay. So with a few months to go, you are booking up people and you are trying to now get everybody you want, including President Obama. I assume that given only a couple months to go, you can get almost anybody you want. So, okay. And so is it the opposite problem in the sense that you have too many people who now want to be on and you can't please them all?
We receive about 250 books a week.
Wow.
Through which we must do a quick search as to what makes sense for the program, what balances the program in terms of art, literature, music, history, politics, and that's for the
Right.
second hour. First hour is always decided just 24 hours in advance. One producer takes charge after we, as a group, have all decided what is the most important program we need to do tomorrow.
Okay, so when you are booking these people now, you have to prepare by reading the books or getting summaries of them. How much research you have to do every night to kind of be ready for the interviews?
My producers do 99% of it.
So you are doing this show now, and you've been doing it for a number of years, as I pointed out, but you had a relationship with your husband for 52 years.
54.
54 years. Mm-hmm. So what happened to your husband's health a few years ago?
After he retired from the practice of international law, he began waiting for me to come home for a daily walk. And this was a man 6 feet tall, very strong, very fit and slender, and a good, strong walk. And all of a sudden, I began hearing a shuffle. And I turned to him and said, "Sweetheart, why aren't you picking up your feet? Why are you shuffling?" And he said, "I don't know." Well, then he began having a series of automobile accidents. And with those, the insurance company said, after 3 accidents in 18 months, we're cutting out his insurance. And I said, or John said, "I'm sorry about this noise." John said, "Well, we'll just find another insurance company." And I said, "I think we'd better have you checked out first." And it was that series of checks that finally led us to a neurologist at Johns Hopkins who said John had Parkinson's disease.
Okay, so he had Parkinson's, and he already had retired, and he was doing volunteer work.
Freer and Sackler Gallery, had studied for a year to become a docent, was a docent at Freer and Salary, then became a reader for the blind and dyslexic, and a volunteer at hospice.
And so he continued that for a while.
Yeah.
But then what happened when he became too difficult to medically treat him? You ultimately had to decide to put him in an assisted living type of facility. Is that right?
We decided that together after he had fallen one night. at 3 o'clock in the morning, and anyone here who has experienced a person who's fallen knows how difficult it is to get that person up. It took me an hour to get him just onto his knees and then to pull him back to his bed and piece by piece get his body back onto that bed. And we knew then he'd have to go into assisted living.
So he went into a facility that you picked out, and you then visited every day, but then you could see the deterioration in him, I guess. So what was it like? You lived together for some 50 years. What was it like kind of being alone? Visiting him every day, living alone?
That's exactly right, David. That aloneness began when he was moved to the facility, and I can remember the very day walking back into our condo and realizing, my God, for the first time in my entire life, I am living alone. I had gone from my parents' home to marriage, to divorce and living with a roommate, and then living with John Rehm for 54 years. And now to be alone for the first time in my life was kind of shocking.
And then you visited him regularly, but then you could tell that the end was coming, and ultimately he died.
John said, I am ready to die. John said, I want my doctor here. I want Jenny, our daughter, who is a doctor in Massachusetts, on the phone. I want our son here, and I want you here, and I want to say to the doctor, I am ready to die. Will you help me? And the doctor said, in the state of Maryland, I can neither legally, ethically, nor morally help you die. The only thing you can do for yourself is to stop eating, stop taking medication, and stop drinking water. And as you know, David, you can go for many, many, many days without food, even months. But if you go without water, the organs begin to break down very quickly. And that's what happened to John within 10 days.
So you have since become a well-known advocate for the right of people to decide to die.
Be careful of calling me an advocate if anyone from NPR is listening.
Well, okay, you're not an advocate because at one point they said you weren't supposed to be an advocate.
Right.
You are a viewer of, you have views on it, but you're not an advocate.
Right.
But what are your views?
My views are that I should have the right to choose what I want for my own death. Thank you. And I want to say this very plainly. If you believe strongly that God should be the only decider, I support you 1,000%. If you believe that you want every opportunity that medical science wants, if you want that, I support you 1,000%. And if you want the right to die when you believe your time has come. I support you 1,000%. So after I step away from the microphone in January, not only am I going to be doing a weekly podcast, but I am going to be speaking out around the country about the right to choose for yourself how you want your life to end.
Now, there are some states that allow you to do that.
5. Oregon became the first, California the most recent, and like the right to marry the person you choose, California became the tipping point. I believe the same is true with death with dignity.
So you'll be doing that after you end your show. Now, in your book, you talk about what it's like after your husband did die, and you had to adjust to not only living alone, but having no partner any longer. And can you describe what that feeling was like, and how you have tried to adjust in dealing with your friends and reacquainting yourself with other people because you now have more time? But how do you describe what the phenomenon is?
I think the grief, the feeling of loss, the yearning for that person there at breakfast or at dinner or talking about what's in the newspaper, I don't think that ever goes away. I think the idea of closure, at least in my own mind, has never existed. I think the loved ones we lose are always with us. And every time I stand at my window on the 14th floor of my condo, and its windows all along, facing west and watching a sunset, I think of John. I believe that I have expanded my friendships. I've intensified my relationships with people, and I am realizing that 54 years that we had were extraordinary and precious. But life goes on, and my life does go on, and we shall see.
So your children live in different cities now, so they're not living here.
Right.
And so therefore, your grandchildren are not living here either?
No.
So have you decided that you'll post-January, you'll put a lot of time into this advocacy work?
Indeed.
And the podcast?
I already have 3 speaking appointments lined up next year for this kind of work, and I will be doing a weekly podcast. I hope you will all send to WAMU your own email addresses so that when the podcast comes out, we'll be able to connect with you right away.
So,
thank you.
As you look back on 37 years of doing this, what would you say is the highlight of it? Is it that you had 37 years, you met so many interesting people, you have so many people around the country who listen to you? What has been the greatest pleasure out of doing this for 37 years?
The greatest pleasure, David, has been the opportunity to listen, to be in the same room with all these wonderful guests, to learn, because I think one of the advantages for me of not going to college is that I yearn to learn. And I have learned every single day. of these 37 years, what perhaps I would never have had the opportunity to do had I simply been lectured to. I'm not a good person to sit and be lectured to. I need to push back a little bit.
Okay. And do your children give you any advice about what they think you should do, or no?
No, they keep saying, Mom, you're doing too much.
Well, I want to thank you on behalf of all of the listeners who listened to you for so many years. I have been one of them, and I was a guest not too long ago. And on behalf of everybody here, I want to thank you, but I also want to give you a gift. And can the person who has the gift bring it? Here it is.
Oh, my goodness.
This is you just celebrated your 80th birthday, and
I
this is a
did.
little birthday gift.
Oh,
So thank you.
David.
Thank you very much.
Oh, David, that's so dear of you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.